Your one click on the subscribe button makes a huge difference. Thank you for your kind support.
Channel 4's documentary Groomed, a national scandal, takes viewers on a harrowing journey through one of Britain's most disturbing and persistent crimes, the systematic sexual exploitation of vulnerable children. Filmmaker Anna Hall, who has been investigating this issue for nearly 30 years, brings together the stories of 5 courageous women who survived unimaginable abuse. Their testimonies reveal not just the horror of what they endured, but the shocking failures of the very systems designed to protect them. This documentary stands as both a powerful record of past injustices and a stark warning that, despite numerous inquiries and promises, the same patterns of abuse continue today. The documentary begins with filmmaker Anna Hall reflecting on her 30-year career, during which she first discovered the pattern of child sexual exploitation in Bradford in 1996. At that time, she learned from Barnardo's about a specific pattern of grooming where predominantly British Pakistani men were targeting vulnerable young girls. What she uncovered then would haunt her professional life for decades to come. The 5 women whose stories form the backbone of the documentary, Chantel, Erin, Scarlett, Steph, and Jade, were all groomed and sexually exploited between the early 2000s and as recently as 2022. Their experiences, separated by geography and time, follow disturbingly similar patterns, suggesting an organized and widespread form of exploitation that authorities consistently failed to address. Chantel's story begins when she was just 11 years old. Placed in a children's home in Manchester after a difficult childhood, she became the target of older men who would wait outside the facility. What started as seemingly innocent attention, food, cigarettes, and alcohol, quickly escalated to sexual abuse. "I think I was going missing every day from that children's home," she recalls. In one particularly disturbing incident, she was taken to a hotel where she was kept for 4 days while men came and went. When she told police, they merely confiscated the mobile phone and gold ring her abusers had given her. No action was taken against the perpetrators. Erin's abuse began when she was 12, growing up in West Yorkshire in the early 2000s. Initially befriended by Asian boys of similar age at the bus station, she was later introduced to their uncles. By age 13, she was being raped. In one horrific incident, she was raped simultaneously by 2 men, her supposed boyfriend and his cousin, who then threw her into her parents' garden and threatened to kill her if she spoke out. When her mother took her to the police station with evidence, including her underwear containing semen and obvious bite marks on her body, the police responded dismissively, "What do you want us to do about it?" The pattern of grooming that both girls experienced follows the 5 stages identified by Barnardo's in 1996, which Hall outlines from her original notes. First, a young girl is courted by an older man who becomes her boyfriend. Second, the man demands dependency and isolates her from friends and family. Third, control is established through emotional manipulation. Fourth, drugs enter the picture. Finally, the girl is asked to sleep with the man's friends, but it's never called prostitution. Instead, she's doing him a favor. Perhaps most disturbing is Scarlett's story, which proves that despite decades of investigations and reports, the same pattern of exploitation continues today. Growing up in a stable, middle-class home, Scarlett became vulnerable after being attacked by local kids at age 13. She met older men who groomed her with drugs and alcohol. By 2022, just 2 years before the documentary aired, she was being trafficked for sex around the country and forced to prepare crack cocaine in a care home. Her father Marlon's desperate attempts to protect her, including placing her in care, ultimately failed to keep her safe from the groomers. The documentary exposes how early warnings about this form of exploitation were repeatedly ignored or suppressed. In 2002, a Home Office-funded report identified 331 young women at risk in Rotherham. The report was buried. Similarly in Manchester, Operation Augusta identified 97 perpetrators and 57 victims in 2004, but the operation was shut down in 2005 due to lack of resources, leaving those perpetrators free to continue abusing children. Even more shocking is how some victims were treated as perpetrators. Jade, who was groomed in High Wycombe from age 14, was arrested and convicted of inciting sexual activity because she had brought a younger girl from her care home to one of the parties, organized by her abusers. She served 14 months in detention and was placed on the sex offenders register for 5 years, while the men who abused her faced no consequences. When people found out my offense, obviously I got classed as a nonce in there. Yeah, it was pretty brutal, she recalls of her time in custody. The documentary doesn't shy away from addressing the sensitive issue of perpetrator ethnicity. While acknowledging that the vast majority of child sexual abuse in the UK is committed by white men and takes place in homes or institutions, Hall explores why British Pakistani men were overrepresented in this specific pattern of organised grooming. She includes voices from within the British Pakistani community who express their disgust at the crimes and emphasise that such behaviour violates both British and Muslim values. Steph's story highlights another disturbing dimension. During a drive with police detective Maggie Oliver, Steph recognized one of her abusers, a man who had imprisoned and raped her for 2 days when she was a child. When Oliver ran the car's license plate through the police database, she was told to drop the investigation because the man was a serving police officer already under investigation for other offenses. Shortly after this incident, Operation Augusta was completely shut down, with all records seemingly disappearing. The documentary presents compelling evidence that authorities' reluctance to address these crimes was partly motivated by fears of inflaming racial tensions. Jane Sr., who managed the risky business project in Rotherham from 1999, recalls being told she needed to stop rocking the multicultural boat. This paralysis left countless children vulnerable to continued abuse. Political exploitation of the issue further complicated matters. The documentary shows how far-right groups like the British National Party and the English Defence League seized upon the crimes to promote anti-Muslim sentiment. In 2004, Channel 4 postponed Hall's documentary Hedge of the Cities about grooming in Bradford after the Chief Constable of West Yorkshire warned it could provoke public disorder, especially with BNP candidates standing in local elections. A watershed moment came in 2014 with the publication of the J Report into Sexual Exploitation in Rotherham, which estimated that at least 1,400 children had been victims between 1997 and 2013. The report led to widespread public outrage and a series of prosecutions across the country. Yet despite these developments, the documentary suggests that the response remains inadequate. In January 2024, Elon Musk's intervention on social media, accusing Keir Starmer of failing to prosecute grooming gangs during his time as Director of Public Prosecutions, reignited the debate. While the government responded with promises to make it mandatory to report child sexual abuse, Hall remains skeptical. I've witnessed countless promises from politicians, countless reports and inquiries, countless apologies from police, councils, and social services. And throughout, victims' lives have been played within a game of political football. The most heartbreaking aspect of the documentary is the ongoing lack of justice for most victims. Of the 5 women featured, only Erin has seen her abusers convicted, 7 men after 3 grueling trials where she faced questioning from 10 defense barristers. Justice has been served, but why has it took so long, she asks. This has been 22 years of my life, 22 years because of these men. Despite Greater Manchester Police reopening the investigation into Operation Augusta in 2019, only 1 person has been convicted so far. Chantel, who has been engaging with the police since 2019, expresses her frustration. I feel like I've put myself through all that for nothing. I just want what they promised me at the beginning, and that was justice. Steph has received no update since 2021 after identifying her abuser, who was allegedly a police officer. I've given up hope. Because it was one of their own, I do genuinely believe that's one of the reasons why they didn't bring him in. The documentary also reveals how those convicted are fighting back in troubling ways. A group claiming that their relatives and friends have been wrongly convicted due to racism has been holding protests and running TikTok live streams. Hall's team infiltrated their private WhatsApp group and discovered they were sharing the names of protected witnesses and even allowing a convicted rapist to call in from prison, both serious legal violations that could deter other victims from coming forward. Despite all they've endured, the women show remarkable resilience. Jade now lives with her children and is close to her mother, though she still hopes to clear her name and remove her sex offender status. Erin, despite the trauma of her court cases, stood her ground and told the truth, leading to convictions. Chantel speaks openly about her experiences, hoping for eventual justice. And Scarlett, despite her ongoing struggles, has maintained her relationship with her father, who has shown her unconditional love throughout her ordeal. The documentary concludes with Hall's powerful reflection on the true scale of the abuse. "I'm angry that the 5 women in our film estimate that they've been collectively abused by hundreds and hundreds of men, and that out of all of them, only Erin has had justice, against just 7 men." She notes that these 5 women represent thousands across the country whose voices have never been heard. In its final moments, the film returns to the survivors, who despite everything, have found ways to move forward. "I think everything I've been through has only made me tougher," says Chantel. "I am proud of who I am and what I've been through. I'm not ashamed anymore," adds Erin. The documentary serves as both a devastating indictment of systemic failures and a testament to the courage of survivors who have spoken out despite being failed repeatedly by those meant to protect them. It makes clear that while there have been improvements in recognizing and addressing this form of exploitation, the fundamental issues, including inadequate resources, political considerations overriding child protection, and a reluctance to fully confront uncomfortable truths, continue to leave children vulnerable today. Groomed, a national scandal, forces viewers to confront an uncomfortable reality. Despite all we now know about the patterns and warning signs of gang grooming, despite the numerous reports and investigations, and despite the brave testimony of survivors, this form of exploitation continues. The film stands as a powerful call to action, to put aside political considerations, to properly resource investigations, to listen to and believe victims, and to ensure that justice is finally delivered to both past and present survivors. The documentary also highlights the importance of addressing this issue with nuance and care. It acknowledges the specific pattern of British Pakistani men being overrepresented in this form of exploitation while also emphasizing that sexual abuse occurs across all communities. It shows how both silence motivated by fears of appearing racist and exploitation of the issue by far-right groups have ultimately harmed victims and hindered justice. What emerges most strongly from this powerful film is the voice of the survivors themselves. Despite being failed by the system, despite having their abuse minimized or ignored, and despite the ongoing trauma they live with, they have found the courage to speak out. Their testimony serves not only as evidence of past failures but as a warning that without fundamental changes in how we approach child protection, history will continue to repeat itself. The patterns identified by Barnados in 1996 remain distressingly relevant today. Vulnerable children, particularly those in care, continue to be targeted through a methodical process that begins with attention and gifts before escalating to control and exploitation. Social services, police, and other authorities still struggle to identify and respond effectively to these cases. And perpetrators continue to operate with a degree of impunity, knowing that the chances of facing meaningful consequences remain slim. The documentary raises profound questions about societal values and priorities. How many reports, inquiries, and testimonies are needed before real change occurs? How many children must suffer before resources are adequately allocated to protection and investigation? And how can we address the complex cultural dimensions of these crimes without either ignoring uncomfortable truths or feeding into racist narratives? For the survivors featured in the film, these questions are far from academic. They live with the consequences of systemic failures every day. Jade cannot attend her children's school trips because of her unjust presence on the sex offenders register. Chantel and Steph continue to wait for justice that may never come. Scarlett carries the trauma of her recent exploitation. And Erin, despite securing convictions against some of her abusers, knows that others remain free. Perhaps the most chilling aspect of the documentary is the evidence that grooming continues in much the same pattern today as it did decades ago. Scarlett's experience in 2022, being trafficked around the country and forced to prepare drugs in a care home, mirrors what was happening to Chantel and Erin 20 years earlier. As Scarlett says, it's not often you can say to people that say it's not happening. Everything that's happened to me, that's your evidence, and it's still happening. The film also raises important questions about how we talk about these crimes. The language has evolved from child prostitution to child sexual exploitation, reflecting a better understanding that children cannot consent to their own abuse. Yet the documentary suggests that in practice, many authorities still view these children as somehow complicit in or responsible for their exploitation. Groomed, a national scandal, stands as an important historical document, tracing the development of our understanding of gang grooming over nearly 3 decades. It shows both how far we've come in recognizing this form of abuse and how far we still have to go in effectively addressing it. It demonstrates how difficult it can be to confront uncomfortable truths, especially when they intersect with sensitive issues around race, culture, and politics. But ultimately, this is a documentary about courage, the courage of survivors to speak out despite being repeatedly silenced and failed, and the courage of those within various systems who tried to raise the alarm despite institutional resistance. It's also about the ongoing need for courage, the courage to listen to victims, to allocate resources where they're needed, to hold perpetrators accountable regardless of their background or position, and to put the protection of children above all other considerations. As Anna Hall reflects at the end of the film, I'd hoped I would never have to return to this subject, but we know from all our conversations over the last year that our 5 women represent thousands and thousands and thousands across the country whose voices have never been heard. Her documentary ensures that at least some of those voices are now being heard, and it challenges us all to ensure that they are finally being listened to.